Hi, good evening everybody. Welcome to the webinar. This is Brian McAleer here, and we're just about to get started, so if you've just logged in, welcome. And we'll just give it a few more moments for any more people who are still logging in, so we'll get started in another minute or two. If you haven't done so already, grab yourself a drink, pen and paper. You may want to take notes or write down some questions, and just sit back and relax, and we'll get started very soon. Okay, it looks like just about everybody who's registered is here and signed in, so welcome. We may get another couple of people sign in the next minute or two, but I'll just go through a couple of things while they're signing in so they won't really miss out on anything. So again, welcome. My name is Brian McAleer. I'm a youth and life empowerment coach, and this is my webinar on the 7 secrets to setting boundaries for your teenager that really work. Now, I imagine that most of you may be parents or you work with teenagers in some form or fashion, whether as a school teacher, a youth worker, a sports coach, a youth minister, something along those lines. And maybe what's brought you here tonight is you're just a little bit curious about what I've got to talk about, or you may be experiencing some challenges or difficulties around setting boundaries for your teenager. And when we talk about boundaries, what do we mean exactly? We're talking about rules, we're talking about limits and restrictions which you put in place to keep your teenager safe and to let them know that they pretty much just can't do whatever they want to. So, so good on you for coming into this webinar tonight and hearing some new information. The title, I imagine, may have caught your curiosity. What are the 7 secrets? Well, that's what I'm going to go through tonight, and I'll be talking about a variety of different topics and areas in relation to setting boundaries for teenagers. Okay, great. So it looks like our last guest has just logged in, so thank you very much. Everybody's here, which is fantastic. So we'll get underway. So again, I just want to say welcome. Wherever you are in Australia or maybe even overseas, thank you for taking the time out to attend this webinar. You may have seen this on Facebook or you were emailed a link or somebody told you about it. However you have heard about this webinar, I just want to acknowledge you for taking action, signing in and listening to the content I'll be presenting tonight. This is probably the 3rd or 4th webinar I've done on this topic, and a couple of them have been uploaded to YouTube as videos under the title How to Set Boundaries for Teenagers That Work. This one will be slightly different. In my previous webinars I've talked about 3 or 4 out of the 7 topics which I consider are important in setting boundaries. Tonight I'll be talking about all 7, and there'll be things that you'll be familiar with or maybe not. And I'll be presenting these in a way that might seem a little bit different and that might not be how you've set boundaries before. So I'll make it clear right here and now that I'm not a parent. I'm not a parent of a teenager. I'm only 30 years old myself, so I don't have any teenagers. But I do work with teenagers. I'm a youth worker. So just to tell you a little bit more about myself, that's me. And I'm a qualified youth work practitioner, and have been working with young people for about 8 years or so. I'm also a qualified life coach as well, and I'm just about to finish off my qualifications in training and assessment. So my passion is working with young people, coaching them to feel empowered and find success and self-confidence at a young age. And I also work with parents like yourself, teachers and other youth work professionals on how they can best empower the young people they work with or their own children. So I like to work with the young people, and I like to work with adults as well, and find myself as a bit of a middleman, helping young people but also helping other adults and professionals who are close to young people. So like I said, I've been doing this for about 8 years now. I first started working on a US summer camp in America at the age of 21, and that's where my overseas experience comes from. So I worked on a summer camp for children with special needs, such as ADHD, autism, Asperger's, learning and behavioral problems, and some challenging behaviors that came with that. So that was a great learning experience for me, and I got to work with some really great kids and see them make some big progress in just a matter of weeks. So that's where I really got hooked, and that's where it all started for me. So after camp, I returned to Australia and commenced my further studies to become a youth worker. Then I slotted in a couple of more visits to camp because I just loved the experience and couldn't stop. And I've also worked in a variety of different roles. I've worked in schools, on other camps here in Australia, various youth programs, in residential settings with some of the most challenging and socially marginalised young people in the community. And most of all, I've worked as a case manager, where I work intensively with 10 to 12 young people at a time on a one-on-one basis, supporting them with all their different life areas. I'm also married, and my wife and I are expecting our first child due in a matter of weeks, actually, so in the first week of July, which we're very excited about. So that's just a little bit about me. Now, some of you may have seen this video on the internet, how to set boundaries for teenagers that work. It's about a 7.5-minute video, and it comes from the introduction to my ebook, where I talk about boundaries, what today's teenagers are like, the role of parents, the role of teachers and youth workers, how important boundaries are, what can happen in the long term when a young person has boundaries in place, and what can happen when there are no boundaries in place. So if you haven't seen that video yet, I recommend that you watch it. If you just type in how to set boundaries for teenagers that work in the search bar of YouTube, that should come up almost straight away. And in that video, I also give you my email address towards the end, where you can request a copy of the ebook for free. So the ebook itself is very much just an introduction to this whole topic, and I'm working on something a little bit more detailed, which I'll talk about later on. So, like I was saying before, what are boundaries and why do teens test them? I just want to talk about this a little bit first before we get into the nuts and bolts of the webinar tonight. So I almost forgot, before we proceed any further, I just want to let you know, if you're listening, that this webinar is being recorded for training purposes. You have the opportunity to ask a question towards the end of the webinar, not during the webinar, because I have got quite a bit to go through. So if you've got a really pressing question, please just write it down, and you can ask me that towards the end of the webinar. You can either speak through your headset, and we can talk to each other over the webinar, and I will unmute you so you can do that. If you don't have a headset or you wouldn't like to talk and have your voice recorded, there's the chat box option as well. You can type a question in there and I'll be able to see that. I'm the only one who can see that question, so your name and your question won't come up for anyone else in the webinar to see, and I'll just refer to you in your first name as well. If you want to use a fake name, that's fine as well. Some people don't want to let others know that they're seeking specialist help, and that is completely fine, and I totally respect that. So why do teens test the boundaries? Firstly, they do it to gain a sense of freedom. Now, your child or your client was once a little child, they're now a teenager, they're not a child anymore, they're not quite an adult, but they are an adult in the making. They're starting to display characteristics and parts of themselves that are the adult parts of themselves, which they will grow into over the next several years. So they're starting to show a lot of characteristics of grown-ups. And they've discovered that they're not children anymore, that they can do a lot more, they can go more places, and they can get away with more. So they've got this sense of freedom, and they really want to experience that. So they hate to feel like they're restricted or tied down, and they also test boundaries to get your attention. Now, this may be a positive or a negative thing. On this topic of attention, a teen may feel like you're not giving them enough attention at all, or you could be giving them the wrong kind of attention. They may want you to just interact with them more, talk to them, hang out, but maybe you're not doing that because you feel, as the parent or the adult in their life, you have to have more of an authoritative role or more of the responsible role. That's fine as well, but you also want to interact with your teen on your level. That's really important for them in their development, because through them, through you, they will discover who they are, and they want to interact with you, get to know you, and get to know themselves. So it's all about attention. They test boundaries to determine what they can and they can't get away with. Teens have their own boundaries for themselves. As I said, they're exploring their freedom and then all of these new opportunities that are opening up for them. And the world is more available to them. They're starting to discover this, that they can go more places, that they can do things on more of an independent level. So they'll have limitations for themselves based on what their judgments of the world are and the people around them. So when you've given them a boundary or a certain expectation of behavior, they're going to compare that to their own and how that's going to play a part in their journey. Is that going to hold them back, or is that going to help them go where they want to be? So that's why they are testing your boundaries. They want to know what they can and they can't get away with. They're also testing you to see how well you'll follow through on that boundary as well. It's a bit of a game for them sometimes. Teenagers like to feel like they've got power and control. Like I said before, and I'll say it many times in this webinar, young people, teenagers, are adults in the making. They're starting to realize that they do have more control and they do have more power. They've got more influence. Their mind is accelerating at a huge rate. They're becoming more mature. They're becoming more social and more aware of what's going on around them. So this power and control all of a sudden is just right there for them. So that's why they test the boundaries. They want to feel like, okay, I know mum and dad are in charge, but I still want to feel like I've got some power as well. Now, teens interpret boundaries very different than the parent, does. So teens quite often tend to see boundaries as a negative thing. So they'll see them as rules and limitations. They'll see them as expectations, what your expectations of them are. Sometimes they'll feel that the boundaries you put in place aren't really necessary, and it's more about you just trying to mold them to be like you. And teenagers don't like to think that they're going to become exactly like their parents sometimes. So they want to have that independence from you, which is another point I go over again and again. They also see boundaries as traps or walls. If you're constantly putting rules in place, even if maybe the teen isn't misbehaving or disrespecting you, they'll feel like maybe you're putting them into kind of a trap or putting walls around them to protect them or shelter them from the world. Teens don't want to feel sheltered. They want to go out into the world, explore, interact with people, find out who they are, and get a sense of where they fit in as well. So if they think there are these walls up around them, they're going to get very frustrated. They can also see boundaries as punishment. It's your way of punishing them for not doing something. In some cases it will be. Depending on what their behavior was, a boundary can be a sort of punishment, and teens will definitely look at boundaries in a more negative light than a positive light. So when teens test the boundaries, they do this for another number of reasons, like I mentioned before, and the outcomes that they're hoping to get from this are that they have a need to experiment. This is actually a part of adolescent development, that the teen likes to kind of live on the cusp of safe and dangerous. So they're testing their own boundaries, they're testing you, and they have a need to experiment to find out what they can do, what they can't do, what works, what doesn't. Risk-taking behavior is another part of adolescent development. It's also a part of the brain which recent studies have showed doesn't really develop until the mid-20s, where we're better at assessing risk and making judgment of situations. This is still developing up until about the age of 25. So teens will take part in risk-taking behavior to be on that cusp of safe and dangerous at the same time. When they test a boundary, this is the outcome they get. They like the rush and the thrill and the feel they get from doing that. They're stating their independence. They're no longer children. They're not quite adults. They're in between. They're not completely independent of you yet, and they know that, but they like to be individual from you. They want to be their own person. They feel like they know it all, especially around the age of about 18, and they want to just do things differently. They're testing themselves. Like I said, teens will have their own boundaries in place for themselves, and they're testing you as well to see how serious you are about following through. They need to know the parameters of the boundaries that you set, and if it's a boundary that works against them, they're going to want to know how far they can push it, because they don't want to be held back. Alright, now getting into it, like I said before, this presentation is a little bit different from the last few, in that I'm revealing all 7 aspects or 7 secrets of setting boundaries for teenagers that work. Now, these are not top secrets that have only just come to light through this webinar. These are things that you'll know, things that maybe you've forgotten and just need a refresher on, or things that are commonplace but just have a bit of a different twist on them. A lot of it really is just common sense. So secret number 1 is remember that your teen is a developing adolescent. So I just put this diagram up there because this really sums up what adolescent development is, the 4 corners of adolescent development. Firstly, independence. I've already mentioned that several times. Body image, a massive part of adolescent development. Why? Because the teen does a lot of their physical growing and hormonal changes during the teenage years. Within a matter of weeks or months or in less than a year, your teenage son can shoot up 1.5 feet and suddenly be taller than you. Or his voice will change overnight, or he'll have facial hair. You know, body image is really important to them because how they appear and how they look is really important to them in relation to how their peers are going to judge them. Which brings me to the next part, peer relationships. Probably the most influential thing on a teenager outside of the media, internet and social networking, and you, the parent, is what their peers think of them. It's very important because at the end of the day, if teens had a fight with you, they don't like what's going on at home, school sucks, you know, the girl they like or the boy they like isn't acknowledging them, they've always got their friends at the end of the day. Their friends tell them who they are. Their friends remind them where they're heading in life. Their friends are there to make them laugh, to put an arm around their shoulder and join them in their journey of emotional development as teenagers. So peer relationships, extremely important, and these will change and fluctuate very quickly during the teenage years. And of course, sexuality. The teens are starting to come into their own and realizing that they are young adults in the making. And all those hormones are in full swing. So you'll see sudden changes in your teenager. And this comes into the fray at different times for different teenagers. You know, for example, some girls will start to display sexualized behavior at the age of 12 or 13. Others not until they're 18 or 19, and the same with boys as well. There is no real sort of certain definite age for when these things happen, and that is in relation to each part of adolescent development. So just keep in mind that when you're setting boundaries in relation to your teen's behavior, their behavior is being influenced by one of these 4 factors, the 4 corners of adolescent development. So if you're struggling to understand why they're acting a certain way, just think, which one of these is influencing that, and that will help you understand their behavior a bit more. Now, you may have seen this image on the internet. It's used quite a lot, the old iceberg. So as you can see here, and as we all know, the majority of the iceberg is underneath the water. What's on top is just a very small portion of it. So think of this as the mind. Okay, the iceberg on top of the water is the conscious mind. Underneath is the unconscious mind, and the water or the ocean is the subconscious mind, which just goes on and on and on. So teens are going through a lot of changes during adolescent development. Consciously, they're experimenting, which I mentioned before. So they're experimenting with their image. You might see your teenager, particularly girls, changing their look on almost a weekly basis. They're also experimenting with substances, drugs and alcohol. They'll be tempted by these at parties. They'll be told they'll be cool if they do it. It'll help them fit in. It'll help them silence some of those thoughts in their head as well. And consciously they're taking risks as well to assess what's safe and what's dangerous within their own world. Consciously they're making choices. Teenagers are making choices on a daily basis. They have big choices to make, such as what do I want to do when I finish school? What activities do I want to do outside of school? What subjects will I pick? Who will I hang out with? And also little choices during the day. It's all about how, if I choose this, how's it going to look? How's it going to make me look amongst my peers? And will I still be accepted? Teens are also expressing their voice consciously, both on a verbal and non-verbal level. And this will be different. You'll find girls express themselves more verbally, talking a lot and also being very outspoken. Boys can be too, but some teenage boys in particular tend to be a bit more subdued, and quiet when they're expressing themselves. Again, that's because they don't want to come across the wrong way around their peers as well. So if your teen isn't telling you exactly how they feel or what their interests are, they'll be expressing these in other ways. It might be in the way they dress, the way they look, or their overall temperament each day. So unconsciously, these are the changes that are happening underneath the surface that the teen cannot control usually and cannot really understand or isn't really aware of what they mean and what's going on. So emotional development, lots of new emotions are developing. Forming their own values, beliefs and limitations. These will be based on their experiences and also the influences of their peers and you, the parent. Hormonal changes as well tend to just happen all of a sudden. Your daughter who's never had an interest in boys, in the space of a week, starts noticing boys or starts talking about boys, and it will change very quickly. And for some teenagers, this really accelerates. For others, it's a little more slow. And the reason behind why they do things. Teens are figuring out who they are, where they fit in the world, what they want, why they do the things that they do. They're questioning that within themselves, and they don't really understand where it all comes from. Just that it does come from them. So those are the changes that are happening unconsciously. The reason I talk about adolescent development in this presentation is that it's an important thing to keep in mind when setting boundaries. For example, if your son went to a party on the weekend and he came home drunk and you found out that he'd been drinking at this party and he's underage, for example, what would be your initial reaction? Your reaction might be that you ground him and he's not allowed to go any parties for 6 months. That's fine. But what drove that choice for him in the first place? Is that something that you're talking about? So instead of just reacting and blasting and yelling at him saying, "Why did you drink? I can't believe you did that," there'll be a reason for that, and that's worth sitting down and talking about with your teenager. If you act in a very angry way, that's not going to address why they did it in the first place. So obviously you will be angry. Let the dust settle, calm down a bit, and then maybe a few days or a week after he's come home drunk from that party, talk to him about it. Say, okay, what happened before you took that drink? Or why did you feel you needed to get drunk? Maybe his friends were pressuring him to do it. Maybe he had a reaction to something. Maybe he was doing it to fit in. Maybe he just wanted to try it once, and maybe he'll never do it again. So have a conversation about that, and you'll find that you'll be able to respond a lot better if it were to happen again, and your teen will feel like you understand them and that you're empathizing with the journey that they're on. Because sometimes the choices they make are not really the choices they want to be making. They feel pressured into doing it by their peers and what's going on around them. So just keep that in mind when you're setting boundaries, and try not to overreact too much. Try and respond instead. That's a big difference between responding and reacting. Okay, so secret number 2 is to learn the value of compromise. So what do I mean by this? Don't just have the one approach when setting boundaries. Be willing to compromise and discuss things with your team through planning and sharing ideas and trying different things. Now, when you compromise with your team, they'll absolutely love this, because they don't want you to be the parent who's my way or the highway, because they will not respond well to that. When you sit down and make an effort to compromise on boundaries with your team, obviously within reason, the buck has to stop with you because you're the parent, but when you do compromise, you can reach an agreement. If you're both on the same page, if you both can see where the risk was and your team can acknowledge that, and they can see how that bothered you and you can see why they did it, if you're on the same page, you're more likely to reach an agreement with each other. And that can be around maybe some of the boundaries of the boundary. Maybe you want to ground your team for a week for something that they did. Ask them and say, do you think that's fair? They may say no, and then ask them, okay, what would be fair for you? And maybe they'll say, well, don't ground me. But it's still your decision. You have to say, no, I will ground you. And you're going to be grounded for a certain amount of time, but I'm willing to work out a compromise with you. Okay, so you've put the boundary in place that they're going to be grounded no matter what. Then they'll start to reason with you and bargain with you. They may say, okay, a week feels too long. Can I just have 3 days if you've got a teen who's going to argue with you? It's up to you. Reach an agreement on what is fair and equal, which brings me to the next point. Compromising on boundaries will show your teen that you're willing to be flexible, which is really important. It also teaches your teen that something or part of is better than nothing at all. So when you compromise on a boundary, maybe they'll want to still have access to all their things that they normally do, like their TV, their iPod, their laptop, all that kind of stuff. You could maybe take one of them away or limit the amount of time they have to use on their internet or their devices as part of their boundary. But don't try and take it away altogether. If they complain, you can say, well, part of that is better than not having it at all. Or you still get some time on it. It's just going to be limited until I can trust you again, and then we'll increase your use on the internet, for example. It also reinforces to your teen an important life lesson that you can't always get what you want. So when you compromise with your teen and tell them these lessons, actually shake hands on it. That's what I would recommend. Then each of you are on the same page. You know what's involved, who has to do what, and that will tend to be the glue that holds the boundary together. So don't be this parent. Don't be the brick wall parent. That's really important. If you only have one approach that you adopt to setting boundaries, your teen will not respond positively to that. And you might find it could create more distance between you and your teen in the long term. So some strategies on how to compromise is to firstly identify what you both want first, and then what you're willing to be flexible on. Now, this is good because it kicks off the whole boundary setting process in a positive way. Identify what you want first, but then be willing to sway and sacrifice some things. Sign an invisible contract. This is really great. Maybe with younger teenagers, sort of 13, 14 years old, where if there's maybe 5 rules that come with your boundary, hold up your hand and in a fist first, and then as you reveal each rule, open one of your fingers one at a time until your hand is opened. Get your teen to do this with you. So each finger represents one of the 5 rules or boundaries. Do this with your teen or your younger child, and then shake hands on it. So this will kind of confirm it. This works really well with younger teenagers. So set out the boundary, then make them clearly visible. So stick a copy on the fridge or make a copy for yourself and your teen to keep. This puts them in clear view, so there's no excuse for the teen not knowing what was required of them. If it is going to be stuck on the fridge, make sure that it can't be changed or edited. Some teens might try to do that. Give them a copy and keep a copy for yourself as well, in case the original mysteriously goes missing, for example. So having it clearly visible is really good as well. Your teen will see it in the passing through the house on an average day. Use the future pace technique. Now, the future pace technique is where you talk about the long-term benefits of your teen following boundaries. And you want to keep this positive as well. So by saying to them, look, you might not like boundaries now that I put in place for you, but I am teaching you a few things by doing this. You're learning about responsibility, which we'll talk about shortly. You're also learning about time management and about respect, and that if you go against the rules, there's consequences for that. And you might not like it now, but when you get a little bit older, that's going to help you be a very responsible person, very mature, and people will look to you for help and for guidance because you've had this upbringing. Now imagine a child who is not getting boundaries put in place at all. They're still being taught lessons in life, but what kind of lessons are they being taught? That they can get away with what they want, that there are no consequences. And then what happens to children or teenagers who only have those things reinforced? It's not good. So using the future pace technique and talking about the long-term benefits for your teen if they follow the boundaries in a really positive way is good. Secret number 3, okay, we're rolling along here really well, is to set boundaries with the goal of teaching your teen cooperation and responsibility. It's a bit of a no-brainer, I realise that. It's not a great secret, but it's an important part I like to mention in this presentation. So when teens take on cooperation and responsibility, it can mean the following to them. They feel a sense of freedom because they're adults. They want to prove, well, they're young adults in the making, and they want to prove themselves. They want to prove to you that they can do things and they can be entrusted with responsibilities, and whether they do it well or they don't do it well, they're having a go, and that gives them a sense of freedom which they really crave. When you're using boundaries to teach them about cooperation and responsibility, this helps your teen believe that they can make more choices for themselves. And this is where you want your teen to lean towards, is to an independent thinking teen who's not easily swayed by peers, and especially negative peers, or what's going on in the media, but that they could step aside and say, well, I see what you're saying there, but I don't really agree with that. I don't feel that's right for me. I'm going to decide for myself. If you've got a teen who can do that, you've done a great job. So come at the approach setting boundaries with the sense of instilling cooperation and responsibility above all else. And these are the sort of things you start to develop in your team. It empowers them to take more action, it boosts their confidence, and their independence will develop more and more. It also turns them into problem solvers as well. And you'll find that as your team takes on more cooperation and responsibility, they'll want to take on even more. And the benefits of a teen who is more cooperative around the house is that a more peaceful and controlled environment can be created, where the home is a bit more harmonious, and your teen is not being rambunctious or causing dramas or annoying anyone else in the house. They're just doing their thing, minding their own business and letting everyone else have their own space and time as well. They'll feel empowered to take on more responsibility and be a doer, not just a talker. They'll want to jump in the game, not just sit on the benches. They become selfless, which is great. You'll find you'll have a teen who is addicted to being responsible and cooperative and might start volunteering or helping out for charities or fundraising for their school, which is really great. It also teaches them the value of giving and taking equally. This is also called the law of reciprocity, and it's another important life lesson I think teenagers need to learn before they become adults, is that it's more important to give before you take, and only take if you've given equally. That's really important. It also influences your team to be a team player and helps them establish a role or position. So normally in a group setting, each of us will step into a new group and automatically take on some kind of a role. We do this based on our personality type and our experiences working with groups. So your team may be the one who dives straight in and takes leadership. Your team may be the diplomatic one who tries to see different sides of people's arguments and help the group come to a mutual decision. Your team may be the peacekeeper. When things get a bit hectic, they'll jump in and tell everyone to calm down and bring the focus back to the center of the group. Or they may be the one who stands to the side quietly, just observing what role everyone else will take first, and then decide which role they want to do. Whichever role that they do is whichever role they do is fine, and they will be more confident in group situations in the future as a result of that. Secret number 4, and this is really the guts of it here, is that the key is communication. Communication is everything. I mean, I could really do a whole presentation on communication on its own. And are you aware that about 70% of communication is not verbal? You know, it's your body language, it's your tone of voice, it's the way you deliver your words, not exactly what you're saying. And this is really important in terms of setting boundaries with your teenager, because they won't often remember what you say to them when you're disciplining them or tell them off. It's the way you told them. So it could be the way you stand near them, it could be the tone of your voice, the way you're looking at them. Those visual things are what your teen is going to remember most. So if you do want what you say to really sink in, you have to be conscious of how you're saying it. And a really great way to do that is to set boundaries in a very assertive way. So assertiveness sits in the middle of this spectrum. One end of the spectrum is aggressive, assertiveness is in the middle, and at the other end is passiveness. Most people live at either the passive or aggressive end, and parenting styles can often be influenced by that as well. Passive means you're kind of easygoing, you sort of let things slide a little bit. You may not ever raise your voice because you don't think that's effective, but you don't have to raise your voice to be effective, but also talking in a really kind of quiet, low way isn't effective either. At the other end, you've got aggressiveness, which is where the parent just reacts to everything that their teen does and yells and maybe raises their voice or clenches their fists or slams doors or whatever. Then in the middle you've got assertiveness, where assertiveness is fueled by responding, not reacting to what's going on. And you speak to your teen or you discipline them with confidence and integrity. And that's really where I encourage parents to do their boundary setting from, is from an assertive angle. So just to give you an example, if your teen came home late, half an hour late on a Friday night after a night out at the movies, and they didn't tell you they were running late, they just walked in, would you be like, Where the hell were you? I was so worried. I'm really angry. Go to your room right now. Okay, that's the aggressive side to it. You've got your passive side, which is like, oh, okay, you're home. Oh, well, thanks for letting me know, and I'm glad you're home, but don't do that again, please. That's not very effective. Assertiveness would be like this: why are you late? Okay, why didn't you let me know you were running late? Okay, well, because of that, next time you go out, you'll need to be home an hour earlier, and if you're going to be running late, you've got to let me know. If you don't, then I will just keep on making your curfew earlier and earlier until you can learn to be on time or communicate to me when you're going to be on time. You need to earn that trust back for me. So that's a bit more of an assertive approach, just to give you an example. You can also put your boundaries in writing. And this is really effective with teenagers as well, because it kind of makes it really official for them, which is what they like. If you just said it and you can't remember exactly what you've said, your teen may remember what you've said even if you haven't, and they may twist your words around. So just remember, if you don't write it down or make a note for yourself of what you've said, hope that you've got a really good memory. I would encourage you to write it down for yourself. Write down exactly what you said or exactly what the conditions of the boundary are, because your team will tend to hear that and retain that information better than you. Also, putting it in writing makes it official and it can't be changed. Emphasize what might happen if the boundary wasn't followed, so looking at the risks, but don't make threats, because again, that's a reactive way to deal with your teen not following boundaries. So if your son heads out the door on a Friday night, jumps in a car with a bunch of guys, P-platers, your natural worry might be, oh, they're going to speed, they could potentially get in an accident. It's not wise to say to your teen, don't get in that car, you're going to get into an accident, you're going to get killed or whatever. Your teen might think, well, no, these are my mates, and we're smarter than most other teens, we'll be fine. Maybe just say, look, if you're going to go out in the car tonight, just make sure you feel safe. If at any time you don't feel safe, maybe just ask your friend to slow down. If he won't, hop out of the car, because it's not worth you getting injured or killed. So emphasize what might happen, but don't threaten your teen. Let them make the choice for themselves, and they can make the choice for themselves. Make the situation win-win, which is very positive. Have a diplomatic approach, so be willing to see both sides of the situation. Obviously yours, but also your teen as well. So understanding how they think and asking yourself, how are they responding to this? What are they feeling? What are they thinking? Doesn't mean you have to change your boundary to empathize with that, but just be wary or aware of how they're going to respond to that, and maybe knowing that in advance can help you respond to maybe some of those retaliations your teen will show. Say what you mean with confidence and stick to your guns. So with confidence is like, like I mentioned before, speaking with assertiveness, and stick to your guns. So follow through on what you say and have a lot of integrity about that. That's really important. If you change, if you sway a little bit, your teen is going to take advantage of that. And describe the boundary visually and specifically. So visually, most of us are visual learners, especially teenagers, where you can describe visually the conditions of a boundary. So if you've said to them they need to be home by 11:30, you could say, I'd like to see you walking in that door at 11:30. I'll probably be sitting in the lounge watching TV or reading a book. If you don't see me in there, it's because you're late and I've gone to bed. If I see you walk in at 11:30, hey, everything's cool, and I'll say hi to you and I'll say good night and go to bed. So describing it visually so they know exactly what they're going to be walking into when they get home if they are going to be late. So just continuing on communication, I want to spend a little bit of time on this because it's very important, is to prepare before the conversation. You can do this by writing yourself a little bit of a script or some notes before you have the conversation. Launching straight into it when you're maybe in a tense, angry, stressed, worried, agitated state will not help you structure the conversation in a good way. Maybe jot down a couple of questions that you've got. A question that is really effective. Not like, where the hell were you? Or, can you tell me why you were late tonight? Is a better question. So writing that down so you remember to say that instead of the more reactive way of asking questions will make the conversation flow a lot better. Change your language. So using a positive tone of voice and also an assertive tone of voice, and mixing up your words. Also make the conversation future focused. I mentioned before the future pacing technique, because you want to remind your team that you are setting boundaries for a reason, and it's to keep them safe, and it's also to teach them some valuable lessons. So remind them what those lessons are. But you don't necessarily want to lecture them like, oh, you have to do this so when you grow up you'll be successful and blah blah blah. That's not guaranteed. No success is really guaranteed for anyone. It's more about teaching them to be responsible adults and taking responsibility for their own choices and dealing with those consequences. Ask your team questions about how they feel about the boundary and listen to what they have to say. They may not say anything because they don't want to tell you exactly how they feel. If they do, listen to them non-judgmentally and say, okay, I appreciate how you feel. However, that's the way it is, but I'm here to listen to how you feel. The fact that you've told me you don't like it is good because now I know you don't like the boundaries and I don't like, punishing you. Maybe if you stop breaking the rules, we won't have to do this. So now I know how you feel. If you don't like feeling that way, change your behavior and we won't have this problem. Just conversation like that. And include your teen in the setting of the boundary, but within reason. Teens like to be included in the process of making decisions and rules that concern them. But like I mentioned before, the buck stops with you. You're the parent, you're in charge, you're setting the boundary, they're living with you, and they have to follow your rules because it's teaching them about life. Follow the rules. Secret number 5. So it's up to you to control the conversation. You don't want your team to control the conversation. You do want them to be a part of it, but you don't want to be like yelling in their face either. Plan the talk in advance, which I mentioned before. Know what your outcome is and be prepared for every possible question or response from your teenager. So controlling anything really, to be in control of anything, whether it's a goal or anything that you're doing, the success comes with that in knowing what your outcome is. Same thing with setting boundaries. Know what your outcome is for your team. Not just the boundary, but the result of them following that boundary. Keep that outcome. That's the bigger picture key you want to keep in your mind when you're setting boundaries. Don't spring the talk on your team. Give them and yourself time to prepare for it. So if you got a call at work from your teen's teacher saying they were caught smoking at school and you didn't know about this, you might be really mad. As soon as you walk in the door from work, they're already home. Don't barge into their room and say, let's have a chat right now, I'm furious. Your teen is going to close up and withdraw and you're not going to have a productive conversation. Instead, you could say something like, I got a call from your teacher today, I found out what you were caught doing. Tomorrow when you get home from school, we're going to have a talk about that. So you give them time to think about it, time to prepare, and that also allows you to cool down and let off some steam if you are really mad about what they did. You don't want to go into a conversation really agitated and angry. You can also have the conversation outside of the home. Sometimes the home is where most of the problems and challenges start. So remove yourself from the environment because in that environment are going to be triggers. And teenagers respond to triggers in a very responsive way is the best way I can put it. And you as a parent may also respond to certain triggers in the house. If that's the cause of the problem or somewhere in the house is a reminder of what's going on, get out of the house, go for a walk or go for a coffee or so, what, some of the best conversations I've had with young people have been when I'm driving with them in the car. The reason for that is they're sitting in the front with you, they don't have to make direct eye contact, and they tend to talk and open up a bit more in the car. There's something about that makes them feel comfortable and more willing to talk. So try, taking the conversation somewhere else. Focus on the positives first and then address any negatives later. This is really important. So, for example, if your teen was caught smoking by a teacher and you've said to them, okay, so the teacher called me and said what you did. Is that true? And they say yes. You could say, all right, thank you for telling me. I appreciate your honesty. Now we have to talk about this. So start it on a positive. That's a little win for your teen, and they'll be a bit more responsive to you during the conversation. Secret number 6, okay, we're getting down to the last couple here, is to use the power of positive reinforcement. This is so important. When your teen does something well, reward them for it. It's pretty simple. You can just come out and tell them, look, I'm really proud of you. I'm proud of the way that you did that. Cook them a special meal or order takeaway for dinner. buy them a gift or increase their pocket money. Do something fun with them. Leave little notes around the house, or introduce your teen to other adults like they were an adult, because that's how they want to be treated. Remember, the more and more you positively reward your teen for good behavior, the more they'll behave well, because they know rewards are in place. But you don't have to reward them every single time. So every time they do wash the dishes, for example, you don't have to buy them a pizza. That's just a life skill and something that everybody has to do. But maybe they made an extra effort in cleaning up. They did more than you asked them to do. Reward them for that. So don't reward them for every little action which is required of them in general. But when they do make extra effort, when they go out of their way, when they offer help when it's not asked for, those are the things that need to have positive reinforcement to encourage your teen to be more helpful and take on more responsibility. And then in the long run, they'll be better behaved. And secret number 7, really important, is to always keep an open mind. You know, as a parent, it's important to let go of judgment and have an open mind when you're setting boundaries for your teen, because this will help reduce disappointment. Mainly, it will help reduce disappointment for you. And don't have some very high specific standards for your teen, because they are still just children. They're learning, they're going to make mistakes, and they're going to stuff up. Remember that, and remember things like adolescent development, where they are in life, what's going on for them, and some of the pressures that they're facing at school or amongst their friends. Don't expect too much of them too quickly or too soon, because they may not always live up to those standards. So being a bit more open-minded and flexible will reduce your level of disappointment, and it also lessens the pressure on your teen and you. It also prompts effective questioning and honest answers when you have more of an open mind. And that goes back to communication, so being willing to change your approach to things. It opens doors to new opportunities, and it can help you develop a curious mindset. That's really valuable in life, and curious mindset comes when you just ask lots of questions and genuinely take an interest in something, and let that be your teen's life and what your teen is going through. If they see that you're really concerned about where they're at in life and you really want to know what's going on, they'll tell you what's going on, and you'll get to know them more, and you'll learn more about them and where they're at, and there'll be a better relationship there. When you're more open-minded, it also makes you more tolerant to failure and mistakes. Continuing on with this, you can create an open mind for yourself in the following ways. Here's a few strategies. Is to keep your emotions in check. So remember, respond, don't react. Prepare for the conversation so you're more in control of it. And maybe set a time to talk about it, or remove yourself from the area where the problems or the emotions will come up. So that's really important as well. This is a big one, obviously. Get rid of some of the baggage, shed some of those negative limiting emotions you might have. You'll know what that is for yourself. I can't tell you what that is. But sometimes it's our baggage and the things that we're holding on to, which are influencing the way we talk to others and the way we treat other people, and the way that can influence a lot of the decisions that you make as well. Develop the unattached third-person view. So say you've had a big argument with your teen because you tried to have a conversation with them about boundaries. It didn't really go anywhere, and you're really mad about it, and you just said, all right, forget it, we'll talk about it later, and you walk away and calm down. Now, think back to maybe where that's happened for you, and replay that scene in your mind. So firstly, see it from your own mind. You can write this down, or close your eyes and think back to a certain event. Close your eyes and see the event again through your eyes. Now, see it from your teen's eyes, and maybe feel some of the feelings they were having. And then the third-person view is to be like a spectator and standing on the outside of that scene and watching yourself and your teen have this argument, with no emotion involved and no sort of attachment at all. You can even imagine yourself on the other side of the room, or watching it on a TV, or watching through a window, and kind of look at yourself and how you were standing and talking and acting in that moment, and the same for your teen as well. That will be a good indicator of how you are responding when you're angry, and how you're coming across to your teen. So that's an aspect of NLP, which is really effective. So you can Google that NLP, and it talks about that sort of technique. And of course, just consider multiple possibilities and solutions and try them all. There's no one way for setting boundaries. Every teen is different, and of course, you as a parent are different, and your Your values will change, you will change, your teen's going to change. The same thing's not going to work all the time, so it's really important to keep an open mind. So those are the 7 secrets I've talked about. I've got one more for you, and this is the really big one. It's top secret. I've never revealed this in a presentation before. And I'm not going to hype it up too much because, like everything else I've talked about tonight, yes, it's a little bit of a secret, but it's also pretty common sense. Focus on the relationship. That is really the key to success in setting boundaries for your teenager. Focus on the relationship. And the way you do this is get to know your teen. Who are they? They're going to be changing really quickly in the 5 or 6 years that they're teenagers. Lots of different interests, lots of values, lots of beliefs, and different ways they express themselves. You've got to keep up with that, because you're there to help facilitate your teenager's journey of self-discovery. So get to know them. Spend quality time with them. You're not just a provider. You're their parent. You don't have to be their best friend. But you are their role model as well. So spend some quality time with them. Do things that they're interested in. Take them out. Ask them questions about their interests as well and their life. What's going on at school? What are their friends like? What are some of the things that they're worried about? What do they think about the world and what's going on in society today? And just have fun with them. I believe if you focus on the relationship you have with your teen, and you're always showing that you're caring and nurturing and loving, and that's the reason why you set boundaries, your teen will respond in a whole different way. And then, if your relationship grows and grows and becomes fantastic, you won't even have to worry about setting boundaries. In some cases, you may not even have to set them at all. So that's kind of bringing us towards the end of the presentation now. I just want to talk a little bit more about what else I've got to offer. So if you feel this webinar tonight has been good value for you, and you're looking for a little bit more information and support in relation to setting boundaries for your teenager, is that I have a monthly membership program which you can become a member of. And I make this available to those who attend the webinar. That's a little way of saying thank you and rewarding you for the action you've taken. I don't offer this to anyone who hasn't attended the webinar. So this membership program, you get access to an exclusive blog, and this blog is invitation only. No one else can come on there and make comments, only those who've been invited. And on this blog I will release content every few days or once a week on setting boundaries and all the different strategies and tips that work. You'll also get emails from me once a week with some more specific tips, strategies and ideas and all the new sort of groundbreaking research into setting boundaries for teenagers that comes out. I'll provide you with that before you hopefully see it anywhere else. You also get email contact with myself as part of this membership program. So I'll provide you with my personal email. So if you've got a particular problem that you're struggling with, you want more clarification on something I've shared or spoken about, or you'd just like to share your experience in implementing what you've learnt, you can email me and I'll give you my email address, which is different from the one that's about to come on the screen. It's my more personal email. So this membership program does come at a cost, but it's only $5 a month, and that works out to be about 16 cents a day. Now, if you think about how much money you invest in your children and your teenagers, whether that be clothing, schooling, books, uniforms, food, entertainment, sports, clothes, you name it, you're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars over their lifetime. For an extra $5 a month, you get exclusive access to my blog, receive tips, strategies, and ideas from me once a week, and exclusive email contact with me anytime you want to. And this can be set up through an easy payment. You can pay for 6 to 12 months up front with a credit card, or we can arrange a direct debit option. So I really encourage you to take advantage of that membership program if you want to go further with what I've talked about tonight. I also just want to let you know that coming in late August, early September of this year is the feature-length book, How to Set Boundaries for Teenagers That Work. It won't look like that, it'll be a bit more colourful, but just to give you an example, this book will go into even more detail on the topic of setting boundaries for teenagers. If you've read the ebook, which I can also send to you after this webinar if you haven't got it, that is merely an introduction. That really just scratches the surface of setting boundaries for teenagers and the 7 areas that I talked about tonight. Now, this book will go into a lot more detail. There'll be stories in there, there'll be exercises, there'll be activities, there'll be real steps and tips that you can use and apply straight away. So if you want to be informed about that, or you're interested in the membership, or you'd like a free copy of my ebook, The Intro to How to Set Boundaries for Teenagers at Work, just send me an email. There's my email address there, info@brianmcaleer.com. That's my main email address. And through the membership program, I'll provide you with another email address, which is my personal one. This is my generic email address where I get all my inquiries to. So just send an email to there, and in the subject heading, just say setting boundaries or interested in membership program, and that way I'll know what it is you're after. And then I'll be in contact with you, within a day or two, and I can talk to you about the membership program or anything else, or even just this webinar, answer any questions that you have, and help out in any way that I can. Now, I'd just like to finish up with this quote. Your choice is to be active or passive in your responses. That quote's by Deborah Day, who is a clinical psychologist from the United States, and she works with parents. And her emphasis is that parents, you play a massive part in your teenager's life. Whether you are actively doing that or passively doing it, you're having a major influence on them, and also in the way that you respond. And that really, I think, gets you thinking, like, what impact are you having on your teen currently? More importantly, what impact do you want to have on them? How do you want to influence their life's journey? Okay, so we're almost out of time. We've got a few more minutes, and I can take some questions here. Sorry, I'll just go back there. So if you have a question, please feel free to put it in the chat box, or you can put your hand up and I will unmute you, and you can actually ask me a question over the webinar. So, okay, I've got a question coming up in the chat box already. Thank you very much. Okay. So this question comes from Paul. Paul says, Brian, you've talked about adolescent development, but how is that different for a 13-year-old versus a 17-year-old? Okay, great question, Paul. I imagine that maybe you've got a 13-year-old and a 17-year-old, or maybe not. Now, adolescent development, like I mentioned before, it has those four corners to it. And it'll come at different times for different teenagers. That's the thing to remember. Now, it's not like certain things will happen at 13, certain things will happen at 15, or certain things will happen at 17. You never really know when it's going to happen. So your teenager is unique and individual. They don't really follow the kind of textbook structure of adolescent development. It'll come to them at different times. So they will show their independence at different stages. Their sexuality will emerge at different times. Their body image will become more important to them at a different stage. It might be early on in the teenage years, it could be later. Look, it really just varies very much. But if you want a lot more information on that area, just hop on the internet. There's tons of information about adolescent development and the different milestones, and some of them do occur at certain ages. My experience working with teenagers is that it's different for each teenager. So yeah, I couldn't really say what happens at 13 or 17 and why. It really just depends on the individual teenager. So, yeah. Okay, so hopefully that's answered your question, Paul. And Paul's typed, yes, thank you, in the chat box. No worries, Paul. Okay, next question is from Anne. Anne says, my teenage son just keeps disrespecting the boundaries. I've tried everything, but nothing works. He tells me to F off, and I'm worried about him hating me. Okay, Anne, thank you for sharing that. I can tell that's obviously a difficult situation for you at the moment, and a sensitive one. And as a parent, I know, well, not myself as a parent, but I understand that parents can get really overwhelmed in raising their teenagers and feel like that nothing you do works. Something will work, I guarantee you. It's just about finding what's going to work for your teenage son and how you deliver that. Now, think about maybe how you're coming across when you're talking to your teen. Are you reacting or are you responding? The communication, your tone of voice, all that sort of stuff. If you believe that's great and you're doing the right thing, but your teen is still just not listening and tell you to F off, then there may be some internal issues that your teenage son is struggling with, some anger issues. It could be some form of a mood disorder. It could be a form of depression or anxiety. I don't want to label what your son's doing at all, but there are a lot of reasons why teens appear to be really angry and tell you, to F off, or, give you the feeling that they hate you when they don't hate you. They might hate the boundary or the things that you're doing to keep them safe. And they could be just struggling with how to deal with that. They could just be struggling with their emotions, not sure how to really communicate that they're angry or they're frustrated. Their initial reaction is just to swear or to do something that kind of cuts you off really quickly so they don't have to deal with it. So he could be having trouble just regulating his emotions. It's terrible to hear your child or a young person close to you swear to you or give you the impression that they hate you. You don't want to feel that way at all. But don't take it personally. It's not you. It's just the way that your teen is responding to what you're saying or what you're doing. So there's a couple of different situations there that could be the cause of it. So that, yeah, that's something that's worth exploring within yourself and also within your teen as well. And if you'd like to email me after this webinar, we can maybe set up a time to chat in person, because I'd like to have a talk with you a bit more one-on-one if you're interested. So if you are, please just email me when this webinar is over. Okay. All right. Were there any more questions for tonight? No? Okay. Alright. Well, fantastic. So that pretty much does it. I'd just like to say thank you for coming to the webinar. And let me just bring up that slide to be appropriate. So thank you very much. I hope you've found some value in tonight's session, and that I've been able to give you some ideas, some tips, some strategies, maybe a little bit of extra support, a bit of reinforcement that you're doing a great job. You have a tough job as parents raising teenagers, and I totally respect what you do. I have a good understanding of young people today, and that's why I've presented this webinar for you. I'm hoping I can help you and give you a few ideas on what to do moving forward. If you found value out of tonight's webinar, please get in touch with me, and I'd be happy to talk with you more one-on-one and provide you with those extra features and information which could make a really big difference. So again, thank you. Thank you for being parents and doing the great job that you do with your teens. Despite the challenges, it's a short 5 or 6 years of the teenage years that are unlike any other time. And enjoy it, because it'll go by really quickly. All of a sudden your teenager is going to be an adult and moving out of the house. So enjoy the time with them and enjoy the ride. And I just want to say thank you again. And please be in touch. I hope you had a great night. Thank you very much.